In a typical academic career at a university, you will run a number of research projects of various categories. They might be fundamental research projects funded by research bodies. They may be applied research projects with government or industry or startup partners. There'll be a wide variety of them. Common to almost all of these is that much of the work will typically be done by research talent that you recruit to that project. And in many cases, these are predominantly people like PhD students, master's students, research assistants, postdoctoral research fellows, and perhaps research engineers or software engineers. So a large part of your success in your career will be determined by how well you can attract and recruit and importantly, retain the talent you need in order to complete these projects successfully. In today's Hacking Academia video, I want to talk about some of the things you can do to make your life easier in terms of recruiting and attracting and retaining talent. Some of these things will be activities that are very easy to do. Some of these will be longer term, more substantive things that you may not have complete control over, but they're all worth considering and thinking about as you refine your strategy for talent during your career. One of the first things to consider is thinking about the nature of the work and research you do in your discipline and your sector, and the on-flow effects that has on the type of talent and the motivations of the talent who might work with you. To grossly simplify, you can really split this into two different categories. The first is what I would call purely passion-driven endeavors. So these are researchers that are strongly related to some sort of cause, often ideological or equity-based, that is very motivational for the people involved and will attract people from all around the world, will often mean people move to suboptimal locations or roles because they really, really want to work on that topic. Obviously, you shouldn't exploit that passion, but it is good to keep in mind that some people will be very, very motivated to take a role with you in those areas, even if some of the aspects of the role are not as optimal as they could be. The second type of arguably more common role is interesting research roles that align with the sort of topics that the individual is looking for or interested in, but where if the conditions are too bad or it's too much, there are too many obstacles in their way, they'll be very pragmatic and they'll go and find another role. And this also relates strongly to whether the sector that you're working in has lots and lots of opportunities, an abundance of alternative options, or whether there are relatively rare opportunities to work on these specific topics. And I'll talk about the greater ecosystem effect in a little bit in this video. In terms of attracting talent, there are a number of different ways to approach this. So in some disciplines, a non-public, direct word-of-mouth approach with a relatively small number of colleagues that you're looking for someone, you need this skill set, will work. But in a lot of other disciplines, especially large disciplines that are very hot and very topical, it will be a numbers game. So the larger your network is, the more exposure you can get publicly for a role or project that you're recruiting for, the higher the chance that after you've talked to individuals who might be interested, gone through all the filtering in both directions, that you end up with sufficient individuals for the roles that you need to fill. Your reputation, both individually, but in terms of your group, the alumni from your group and where they've gone, as well as the greater ecosystem in terms of your faculty, the university, even the country that you're located in, will also play a role. And even if you can't compete directly on things like salary, which is quite a common occurrence in areas of computer science like AI and robotics and computer vision and machine learning, if you have a reputation for a good culture or a wonderful location geographically to work in, sometimes that can tip the balance in your favor, even when you can't necessarily directly compete on conditions or compensation. Obviously, some of these things are long-term cultural changes. They can take years to implement. They're difficult to get right. And it's why you early career academics who are taking their first faculty position often give a lot of thought to the ecosystem and the culture of the group and the university that they're joining, because they know that that will have a critical effect on their ability to retain and recruit talent, as well as the overall reputation and prestige of the university as well. University roles cannot typically compete or even hope to compete directly with industry salaries and compensation, especially in really, really hot topic areas, anything to do with tech, again, AI, robotics, machine learning, and so forth. There will often be literally an order of magnitude difference in the compensation between a university and an exciting startup or a big tech company. That said, there are things that you should do and be aware of with respect to salaries. So when you are proposing a grant or a fellowship or a project in the first place, don't skimp on the salaries for the researchers you want to recruit. There will be limits to how high you can set the salary, but often people will feel like knocking off a few extra % on the salary is going to massively improve their chances of getting the grant. But if they actually get the grant, it's going to cause them huge headaches in terms of recruiting and retaining talent. So almost always in the long term, it is better to appropriately cost and even perhaps slightly generously cost for salaries for your young researchers on your project, because if you get the project, it's going to make it much easier to attract and importantly to retain that young talent. In terms of strategy for how you pitch for and apply for projects of various sorts, one of the other things to keep in mind is the type of talent you're realistically going to get. So if all of your project proposals are projects where the activity would need geniuses who are very hardworking, very motivated, and very savvy, you are unlikely to be able to recruit all of that talent. What will probably serve you better is to have a tiered sort of hierarchy of projects and activities that you apply to do, where there are some sort of very ambitious fundamental research projects where you really do need those intellectual powerhouses to have a chance of pulling it off. But you should also pitch some relatively more mundane work where there's very little uncertainty that you can eventually get it done, and you have a much wider range of options in terms of talent pools from which to recruit from in order to get that work done. This also applies for the nature of the work that you're pitching for in your group. If all of your projects are greenfields projects in research areas where you as the experienced supervisor literally have no idea what the eventual solution can be, realistically, you're going to struggle with your talent because that talent will inevitably start to falter or struggle on these projects because it's new ground, it's very challenging. And if you are also struggling to provide them with insightful suggestions and tips, it's all going to fall apart. So again, a hierarchy where there are some projects where you are not really master of it, you don't know exactly what's going to happen, and they're very exciting, is good to combine with a number of projects where when the going gets tough, you almost certainly will be able to provide a very insightful set of suggestions to the talent for how to proceed. Another key talent consideration when you're recruiting for your projects is the degree of autonomy that that talent possesses. So especially as you scale up the number of projects that you're running in parallel, if you are required to come in and micromanage each of the projects continuously, it just won't scale. Eventually you'll run out of time and energy. And so both pitching some projects that can run relatively autonomously and finding talent that is able to run for periods of time without having extensive sort of detailed input and suggestions from you is key to running a successful lab ecosystem. I talked earlier about enlarging the pool of talent from which you can recruit from by strategically thinking about what topics your projects will cover. To give you some specific examples of that, for us who work in robotics or computer vision or artificial intelligence, if we are only able to or only targeting computer science graduates, that's going to limit our pool substantially, and again, there's a lot of competition from industry. If instead you have projects where quite plausibly you could upskill and train a mathematics graduate or an electrical engineer in-house to be quite effective at that project, given what is required from it, that massively enlarges your talent pool. It also means you are competing for talent from pools which may not have as much direct, well-compensated industry compensation, and will increase your chances of being able to find the talent that you require. Finally, retention should not be overlooked. So it is generally easier to try and retain good talent whenever reasonably possible, rather than to recruit from start for fresh individuals to fill roles. And so while there'll be limits to what you can do to keep people happy and interested and engaged in staying in your group, every reasonable effort really should be put into this if you have the power to do so, because it's going to save you an immense amount of effort in terms of recruiting, running new advertisements, doing lots of new interviewing, and so on. So retention is just as important, perhaps more important than recruiting. You won't always be able to retain people. Sometimes it's healthy for all parties in terms of growth and next stages for people to move on at some stage, and almost all people will move on at some stage unless they become an academic at your own organization. But retention is something I think that is increasingly important to focus on. Another part of the retention component is obviously the opportunities, development and environment that you provide for people in your group or your center or your institute. And again, all the typical things are important here. So providing professional growth pathways where possible. Not everyone can become an academic, of course, at your particular organization. Providing training, providing a rich work social environment with opportunities to engage, especially for people who might be coming there from overseas and are developing an entirely new friend and social network there, are all important parts of the retention component of recruiting. So the next time you are thinking about a really exciting idea for a project or a fellowship or a grant or a collaboration with industry, also think about the type of talent you think you would need to do that project. Is it a very limited, tiny pool of talent, or is it a very large pool of talent from many, many different disciplines that could plausibly do the work? And bake this consideration of talent and talent availability and competition for talent into your overall due diligence and development process for all those wonderful research ideas that you have floating around.